The scissors snapped like steel jaws in the principal's office as 12-year-old Marcus Wilson's violin strings were cut one by one, revealing the dyslexia he'd carefully hidden beneath his musical talent. Principal Hargrove stood watching, satisfaction in her eyes as she forced the school counselor to continue until nothing remained of the instrument. The administrator had found her perfect target, a quiet musician whose military father was deployed overseas and whose learning disability made him vulnerable. A single video, secretly captured by Marcus's friend Zoe, traveled across oceans to Captain James Wilson's phone. What Westridge Academy didn't realize, as they issued their one-day suspension and dismissive statement, was that they hadn't just humiliated a child. They had declared war on a man who had commanded elite units in combat zones. And when James Wilson walked through those school doors 3 days later in full military uniform, the hallway fell silent, everyone instantly understanding that this wasn't just about a violin. This was about justice. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Sunlight filtered through the classroom blinds, casting warm stripes across Marcus Wilson's desk. The 12-year-old sat hunched over his music theory notebook, his pencil moving in delicate strokes as he translated the notes into a system only he could understand. His violin case rested against his chair, the instrument never far from his reach. For Marcus, music wasn't just a hobby, it was the language that made sense when words failed him. "Marcus Wilson," Principal Hargrove's sharp voice cut through the classroom. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus's hand froze mid-stroke. "Just finishing my notes, Principal Hargrove," he said quietly, not looking up. Principal Hargrove strode down the aisle, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She towered over Marcus's desk, arms crossed tightly over her chest. At 52, Eleanor Hargrove had administered Westridge Academy for over 15 years, and she prided herself on maintaining excellence. The private school's reputation depended on it. "That doesn't look like algebra to me," she said, snatching the notebook from Marcus's desk. The class fell silent as she flipped through the pages of musical notations interspersed with Marcus's unique system of symbolious way of coping with dyslexia. "This is why your standardized test scores are slipping. Too busy being a musician to pay attention." Principal Hargrove's voice dripped with disdain. Marcus's test scores weren't slipping. His musical method of learning had actually improved his comprehension in most subjects, but he didn't correct her. Instead, he stared at his desk, waiting for the moment to pass. "And this violin," Principal Hargrove continued, eyeing the case with visible contempt. "So distracting. Don't you think it's a bit much to bring to every class?" A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Zoe Chen, Marcus's best friend since kindergarten, shot him a sympathetic look from across the room. The morning announcements crackled over the PA system, saving Marcus from having to respond. Vice Principal Thornton's monotone voice filled the room. "Attention students and faculty. This is a reminder that our strict academic focus policy will be enforced starting today. All non-academic items must be stored in lockers during class time. Thank you for your cooperation." Principal Hargrove's thin lips curved into a smile. "Well, isn't that timely?" She tossed Marcus's notebook back onto his desk. "Stand up, Mr. Wilson." Marcus slowly rose from his seat, his heart pounding. 24 pairs of eyes turned to watch. "Front of the class, please," Principal Hargrove instructed, pointing to the whiteboard. Marcus walked to the front, his steps heavy. He kept his gaze on the floor. "Class, this is a perfect example of a focus violation," Principal Hargrove announced, circling Marcus like a predator. "This violin is excessive and distracting. The handbook clearly states that personal items must be stored in lockers during instructional time." "Principal Hargrove," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible, "I have a learning." "Speak up," Principal Hargrove interrupted. "If you have something to say, the whole class should hear it." Marcus swallowed hard. "I have a learning accommodation," he said slightly louder. "My dad got permission from the school for my violin." Principal Hargrove's expression hardened. "A learning accommodation that requires a musical instrument? That's a new one." She turned to address the class. "See how students will say anything to get around the rules." No one laughed. The silence was deafening. "You either put that violin in your locker right now, or you'll be sent to my office," Principal Hargrove declared. "Your choice." Marcus's eyes welled with tears. "Please, I can't. My dad." "Your father isn't here," Principal Hargrove cut in, "and I doubt he'd approve of you lying to an administrator." She grabbed Marcus by the arm. "Let's go. We'll sort this out in my office." As Principal Hargrove pulled Marcus toward the door, Zoe quickly slipped her phone from her pocket and pressed record, capturing the administrator's tight grip on Marcus's arm and the fear on her friend's face. The hallway stretched endlessly as Principal Hargrove marched Marcus toward her office, her fingers digging into the boy's upper arm. Students in other classrooms glanced up as they passed, curious eyes following the unfolding scene. "Mr. Finch," Principal Hargrove called as they entered the main office. "This student is in violation of the focus policy. He claims he has some sort of learning accommodation, but I have my doubts." School Counselor Finch looked up from his computer, his brow furrowing as he took in Marcus's tear-streaked face. "What seems to be the problem?" "His violin," Principal Hargrove stated flatly. "It's against regulations." "I have dyslexia," Marcus managed to say. "My dad filed paperwork. The violin helps me process information. Please check." Counselor Finch moved to his filing cabinet. "Let me see." "Don't bother," Principal Hargrove interrupted. "I already checked his file this morning. There's a general learning plan, but nothing specific about musical instruments." This was a lie, but Marcus was too overwhelmed to challenge it. "But my dad talked to the board," Marcus insisted. "Please call him." "Your father's deployed overseas, isn't he?" Principal Hargrove's tone was suddenly sympathetic, though her eyes remained cold. "Look, I understand this is difficult, but rules are rules. We need to confiscate this instrument for the sake of academic focus and equality." Counselor Finch hesitated. "Shouldn't we call his mother first? I have parental contact information on file." "This is a school policy matter," Principal Hargrove lied again, her voice confident. "We're authorized to enforce the focus policy." Still uncertain, Counselor Finch glanced between Principal Hargrove and Marcus. "I suppose if there's no specific accommodation." "There isn't," Principal Hargrove assured him. "Now, let's see this violin." Marcus's blood ran cold. "No, please," he begged. "My violin. You don't understand." But Principal Hargrove was already guiding him into a chair in her private office. Counselor Finch reluctantly followed, still looking unsure. "This is for your own good, Marcus," Principal Hargrove said, opening the violin case. "Everyone follows the same rules here." The instrument gleamed under the office lights, its polished wood surface reflecting years of care and practice. It had been Marcus's grandfather's violin, passed down when the elderly man recognized his grandson's talent and need for expression. "Beautiful instrument," Principal Hargrove remarked, lifting it from the case. "Quite expensive, I imagine." "Please, don't touch it," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. Principal Hargrove ignored him, examining the violin with cold curiosity. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached for a pair of scissors from her desk drawer. "What are you doing?" Counselor Finch asked, alarm rising in his voice. "Teaching a lesson about priorities," Principal Hargrove replied. "Music is a distraction from real education." With a swift motion, she snipped the first string. The metallic snap echoed in the small office. "Stop," Marcus cried, lunging forward. Principal Hargrove held the violin away from him. "Sit down, Mr. Wilson, or you'll face suspension." Tears streaming down his face, Marcus watched helplessly as she cut the second string, then the third, and finally the fourth. Each snap felt like a physical blow. "There," Principal Hargrove said, placing the, now, silent violin back in its case. "Now you can focus on your actual studies instead of this distraction." Marcus couldn't speak. His body shook with silent sobs as he stared at his violated instrument. "That's enough," Counselor Finch finally intervened, his face pale. "This has gone too far." "I'll decide what's enough, Mr. Finch," Principal Hargrove replied coldly. "You can return to your duties now." "I'll give you a few minutes to collect yourself," she told Marcus. "Then you can return to class. The violin will remain confiscated until the end of the semester." She exited the office, leaving Marcus alone with his destroyed instrument. He gently touched the severed strings, his fingers trembling. The violin had been his voice, his way of making sense of a world that often confused and overwhelmed him. Now, it lay silent, broken. Minutes later, the door cracked open. Zoe peeked in, her eyes widening at the sight of the destroyed violin. Without a word, she rushed to Marcus's side, pulling off her hoodie and gently wrapping it around the instrument case. "I saw what happened," Zoe said, her voice trembling with anger. "I recorded some of it. My brother's going to help us. That witch can't get away with this." Marcus said nothing. He clutched the wrapped case to his chest and stared blankly ahead. That evening, as the video began circulating online, the school issued a brief statement. "We are aware of a disciplinary misunderstanding that occurred today. The administrator involved has been placed on administrative leave for 1 day while we investigate the matter. The privacy of all parties will be respected during this process." No mention of the destroyed violin. No mention of Marcus's learning disability. No mention of the humiliation a 12-year-old boy had endured at the hands of someone meant to protect him. Sophia Wilson paced the living room floor, her cell phone pressed tightly against her ear. The former concert pianist had been trying to reach her husband for hours, leaving increasingly urgent messages. "James, call me as soon as you get this," she said, her voice strained. "It's about Marcus. Something happened at school. It's bad." She ended the call and ran a hand through her dark curls, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Captain James Wilson was 3 weeks into a classified operation overseas. Communication was limited at best, and Sophia had no way of knowing when he'd receive her messages. Right now, she was on her own. Upstairs, Marcus hadn't spoken a word since she'd picked him up from school. He'd simply handed her the violin case wrapped in Zoe's hoodie and walked silently to the car, his expression vacant in a way that had unleashed a flood of emotions Sophia struggled to contain: anger, confusion, heartbreak, and a burning desire to march back into that school and demand answers. But Marcus needed her more, so she drove home, helping him inside when his legs seemed too weak to carry him. Now he sat motionless on his bed, staring at the wall, the violin case clutched to his chest. Meanwhile, across town, Board President Thomas Westridge had called an emergency meeting in his office. The blinds were drawn, and his secretary had strict instructions not to interrupt. "This is a nightmare," Westridge muttered, loosening his tie. At 63, he'd built Westridge Academy from the ground up, naming it after his family and establishing it as one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. "What the hell were you thinking, Eleanor?" Principal Hargrove sat stiffly in one of the visitor chairs, her posture defensive. "I was enforcing the focus policy as instructed." The boy was being defiant. The third person in the room, Harold Brennan, the school's attorney, cleared his throat. "Let's focus on damage control. The video doesn't show the actual destruction of the instrument. We can frame this as a miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" Westridge's voice rose. "She cut the strings of a child's violin." "Partial video evidence," Brennan countered coolly. "Her word against the students, and we have the new focus policy to back us up." Principal Hargrove nodded. The boy claimed to have some learning disability accommodation, but there was nothing specific in his file about musical instruments. "Was there anything about dyslexia?" Westridge asked, remembering a conversation from months ago. "Not that I saw," Principal Hargrove answered too quickly. Brennan tapped his pen against his legal pad. "Here's our approach. We acknowledge a disciplinary incident occurred. We say proper procedures weren't followed, hence the one-day suspension, but we don't admit to any specific actions. We cite student privacy laws to avoid details. And if the parents push, we suggest private mediation." Brennan replied, "Keep it out of the courts. Offer counseling for the student, maybe a transfer to another classroom, perhaps a replacement instrument as a goodwill gesture." Westridge nodded slowly. "Fine. Draft the statement. I want this contained by tomorrow morning." As the adults plotted, Marcus sat in his darkening bedroom. His music composition notebook lay open beside him, but the pencil remained untouched. The melodies he'd created, brave, colorful pieces that had helped him overcome obstacles, seemed meaningless now. He ran his hand over the violin case again, feeling the shape of the instrument inside. The physical sensation was strange, but it was nothing compared to the hollowness inside him. In his mind, he kept replaying the moment when the first string snapped, the sudden silence, the satisfaction in Principal Hargrove's eyes, the helplessness. Sophia knocked gently on his door. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart," she called softly. Marcus didn't respond. He hadn't spoken since climbing into her car that afternoon. "Marcus." She pushed the door open slightly. "You need to eat something." He turned away from her, pulling the violin case closer to his chest. Sophia sighed, her heart breaking for her son. "I'll leave it here," she said, placing a plate on his desk. "Try to have a few bites, okay?" When he didn't respond, she added, "I love you, Marcus. We're going to fix this." "But how do you fix something like this?" she wondered as she closed his door. In another part of town, Zoe Chen sat at her brother David's kitchen table, watching him upload the video clip. "Are you sure we should do this?" Zoe asked nervously. "Marcus is so private, he might not want everyone to see." David, a law student and budding activist, looked up from his laptop. "This isn't just about Marcus, Zoe. This is about every kid with a learning disability who's been punished instead of accommodated. This is about power and who gets to exercise it." "But Marcus will thank you someday," David assured her. "Sometimes the only way to fight injustice is to expose it." He hit the upload button. Done. Now we wait. By morning, the short clip had been viewed over 0 times. Comments flooded in, most expressing outrage, some questioning what happened before the recording started, others demanding to see the full story. Zoe texted Marcus repeatedly but received no response. Ms. Rivera, the school's music teacher and Marcus's favorite instructor, caught wind of the incident during her morning prep period. Known for her vibrant scarves and genuine connection with students, Ms. Rivera immediately went to Principal Hargrove's office, only to find her on administrative leave. She redirected to Board President Westridge's office instead. "Is it true?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Did Eleanor really destroy Marcus Wilson's violin strings?" Westridge's face remained impassive. "Carmela, you know I can't discuss disciplinary matters involving other staff." "This isn't about staff, Miss Spouse." Rivera pressed. "This is about a 12-year-old boy with a learning disability who was humiliated in our school that's supposed to protect him." "We're handling it," Westridge said dismissively. "Handling it?" Miss Rivera's voice rose. "By suspending Hargrove for 1 day. That's not handling it, Thomas. That's sweeping it under the rug." Westridge's expression hardened. "Be careful, Carmela. Your contract renewal is coming up. I'd hate to see your passion interfere with your professional judgment." "Are you threatening me?" Ms. Rivera asked incredulously. "I'm reminding you of your place," Westridge replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board call in 5 minutes." That afternoon, Sophia found an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under her front door. Inside was a handwritten note. "Check the IEP files. They know what happened." Her hand shook as she read the message again. Someone on the inside was reaching out, someone who knew the truth. That night, Marcus finally fell into an exhausted sleep after hours of silent tears. But his rest wasn't peaceful. In his dreams, he stood on the school stage during assembly. One by one, his violin strings began snapping, each one making a horrific discordant sound. The entire student body pointed and laughed, their faces distorting into grotesque masks of cruelty. In the dream, he tried to run, but his feet were rooted to the stage. Principal Hargrove appeared with oversized scissors, smiling as she approached. Marcus woke with a scream, his body drenched in sweat. Sophia rushed into his room, gathering him into her arms as he sobbed against her chest, the first sound he'd made in nearly 24 hours. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Mom's here. You're safe." But they both knew it wasn't true. How could he be safe when he'd have to face those same hallways again, those same stairs, that same principal who had destroyed not just his violin, but his sense of security and self-expression? Sophia called the school board, demanding an emergency meeting. The secretary put her on hold for 17 minutes before returning with a response. "The board will review the incident at their next scheduled meeting in 3 weeks, she informed her, her voice professionally detached. 3 weeks? Sophia's grip tightened on the phone. "My son was assaulted yesterday." "Ma'am, we understand your frustration, but proper protocols must be followed. The incident report has been filed, and the administrator has been disciplined. If you'd like to file a formal grievance, I can email you the form." Sophia hung up, fuming. They were stalling, hoping the outrage would die down, hoping she would give up. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Online, the video continued to gain traction. Local news outlets picked up the story, though their coverage was frustratingly vague. Incident at prestigious academy sparks controversy. Comment sections filled with conflicting opinions. "That poor kid. That principal should be fired immediately." "We don't know the whole story. Maybe the boy was being disruptive." Why are people making this about learning disabilities? It's about following school rules. Neurodivergent children's needs are always ignored. This is just another example. The discourse raged, but for the Wilson family, this wasn't some abstract debate. This was their life, shattered in a single afternoon by an administrator's cruelty. Far away at a military outpost, Captain James Wilson finally received Sophia's encrypted video message. His stoic composure, the same that had earned him respect among his subordinates, cracked as he watched the short clip of his son being marched down the hallway, fear etched across his face. The message attached was brief. "Marcus needs you. They destroyed his violin. All of it. He hasn't spoken in 2 days. I'm trying, but I don't know what to do." James's hand flew to his mouth, stifling a gasp. 15 years of military training had prepared him for many things, but not this. Not an attack on his child, on his most vulnerable spot. Within minutes, he was in his commanding officer's quarters requesting emergency family leave. Within hours, he was on a transport plane headed home. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his mind racing with questions, scenarios, and plans. Someone had touched his son. Someone had violated his child's dignity. Someone had exploited their power to humiliate a 12-year-old boy, and that someone would pay. As the plane soared across continents, James made a silent promise to his son. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Captain James Wilson pulled into the school's visitor space. He hadn't been home long enough to change out of his uniform, nor did he want to. 20 hours of travel had left him exhausted, but adrenaline coursed through his veins, keeping fatigue at bay. "Remember what we talked about," Sophia said from the passenger seat, her voice tight with concern. "These people aren't worth your career." James checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting his cap with precision. His eyes, usually warm brown, had hardened into something resolute and unyielding. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he replied, his voice measured. The calm in his tone was more frightening than any anger. "This isn't about my career. This is about our son." He'd spent the flight home reviewing his approach. As a captain who'd commanded elite units in high-pressure combat situations, James knew that emotional outbursts rarely achieved objectives. Strategy and control, these were his weapons now. The school hallway fell silent as James entered, his boots striking the marble floor with rhythmic purpose. Students pressed themselves against lockers, conversations dying mid-sentence. Teachers emerged from classrooms, curious about the sudden hush, only to step back when they saw him approaching. His military uniform commanded respect. James's expression demanded answers. A young teacher started to approach him, then thought better of it. A janitor nodded slightly as he passed, a gesture of subtle solidarity. James didn't break stride, moving with the confident bearing of someone who knew exactly where he was going. The administrative office door stood halfway open. Inside, several staff members were gathered around a coffee pot, including a thin woman with graying blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. "Principal Hargrove," James pushed the door fully open. The conversation inside died instantly. Principal Hargrove turned her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Recognition flashed across her face, followed immediately by something James recognized from his years in combat: fear. "Captain Wilson," Principal Hargrove stammered, her cup trembling slightly. "I didn't realize you were back from deployment." "Clearly," James replied, his voice arctic. He remained in the doorway, his presence filling the small room. "I understand you've met my son rather intimately, in fact." The other staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One by one, they found excuses to leave, squeezing past James with averted eyes until only Principal Hargrove remained. "I was simply enforcing school policy," Principal Hargrove said, attempting to regain her composure. "Perhaps if you'd been more present in your son's life." Don't, James cut her off. Don't pretend this is about focus policies or my deployment. We both know better. The air between them crackled with tension, laden with an unspoken history. I don't know what you're implying, Principal Hargrove replied, but her voice had lost its conviction. 10 years ago, James said quietly. Fort Benning. Does that refresh your memory, Lieutenant Hargrove, or did you think I wouldn't recognize you? Principal Hargrove's face was drained of color. You were in my training unit, James continued, discharged after multiple infractions and failing the leadership qualifications 3 times. That was different, Principal Hargrove whispered. You singled me out. You had it in for me from day one. Because you couldn't follow simple orders, James replied. And because you filed false reports about your black colleagues. Sound familiar? Principal Hargrove set her cup down with shaking hands. You can't prove anything. Not then. Not now. James stepped closer. I don't need to prove it. I lived it, and now so has my son. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. This isn't over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. If you ever come near my son again, you'll learn exactly why my unit called me the Ghost. As James strode toward the board president's office, memories surfaced from his military past. Eleanor Hargrove had been a problem from the first day of training, constantly undermining her black peers, claiming they received preferential treatment, filing complaints when she was corrected. After being discharged, she'd threatened to make them all pay someday. And now here she was, wielding power over children instead of adults. The realization made James's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral as he approached Board President Westridge's office. His secretary attempted to stop him. Do you have an appointment? James didn't break stride. He'll see me. He opened Westridge's door without knocking. The board president looked up from his computer, irritation flashing across his face before recognition set in. Mr. Wilson, he said quickly, standing, we weren't expecting. Captain Wilson, he corrected him, and you should have been expecting me the moment your principal assaulted my son. Westridge gestured to a chair. Please sit. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Mr. Westridge. James remained standing. I'm methodical. There's a difference. He placed a military folder on the desk. The label read, Incident Report, Wilson, Assault and Battery, Educational Negligence, Civil Rights Violation. What's this? Westridge asked, not touching the folder. This, James said coldly, is what handling a situation looks like. My team has already compiled witness statements, medical documentation of Marcus's condition, and copies of all the accommodation forms we filed with your office last year. Westridge's confident demeanor faltered. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Principal Hargrove has been disciplined. A one-day suspension is not discipline, James interrupted. It's a vacation. He tapped the folder. Inside, you'll also find evidence that Principal Hargrove has a history of racially motivated incidents. This isn't her first time targeting a black child, though it may be her most brazen. Westridge's face darkened. These are serious allegations. They're documented facts, James corrected, and they'll be submitted to the State Board of Education, the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, and, if necessary, the media. You're threatening the reputation of this entire school over one incident? Westridge asked, his tone incredulous. You threatened my son's dignity, his mental health, and his right to an education free from discrimination, James replied evenly. I'd say we're still not quite even. Later that afternoon, Principal Hargrove sat in a small office at the local news station, adjusting her collar nervously as a producer clipped a microphone to her blouse. "We'll be live in 3 minutes," the producer said. "Just tell your side of the story, like we discussed." Principal Hargrove nodded, practicing her most sympathetic expression on the monitor. When the red light came on, she transformed her face into a mask of wounded professionalism. "Thank you for having me," she said to the anchor. "It's important that people hear the truth." "And what is the truth, Principal Hargrove?" the anchor asked. "I was simply doing my job," she replied, her voice quavering slightly for effect. "The school has implemented a strict focus policy, and as administrators, we're expected to enforce it." This student had been warned multiple times about bringing his violin to class. "The student's family claims he has a learning disability," the anchor noted. "There was nothing in his file about musical instrument exemptions," Principal Hargrove countered. "And frankly, I think this is being blown out of proportion because his father is in the military. He's trying to play hero by threatening the school, but where was he when his son needed guidance on following simple rules?" The anchor's eyebrows rose at the personal attack, but before she could follow up, Principal Hargrove continued. "I've dedicated my life to education 15 years as an administrator, and now my reputation is being destroyed because one parent doesn't think the rules apply to his child." Across town, Sophia Wilson waited until nightfall to return to the school. The anonymous note about the IEP files had been eating at her all day. Who had sent it, and what would she find? The janitor, who had nodded at James earlier, was waiting by the side entrance, keys in hand. "Walter Johnson," he introduced himself, voice low. "My grandson had Principal Hargrove 3 years ago. Trust me, I know what that woman is capable of." "Thank you for this," Sophia said, shaking the man's hand. "I don't want to get you in trouble." Walter shrugged. "Some things matter more than a job. The special education office is down the hall, second door on the right. The files are in the cabinet marked IEPs and 504 plans." Sophia moved quickly through the darkened hallways, the beam of her flashlight bobbing ahead of her. The special education office was unlocked, as Walter had promised. She headed straight for the file cabinet. It took her 15 minutes of searching before she found a complaint form Marcus had submitted 2 weeks before the incident. In it, he described how Principal Hargrove had made repeated comments about his violin, calling it distracting and unprofessional. The form was signed and dated, but there was no indication it had ever been processed. Scrolled across the bottom in red ink were the words, "No action required." Sophia photographed the document with her phone, her hands shaking with anger. They'd known, they'd had warning, and they'd done nothing. While Sophia gathered evidence, James sat at his home office desk, methodically filing formal complaints with every relevant authority: the State Board of Education, the Office for Civil Rights, the Americans with Disabilities Act Enforcement Division, and the National Association of School Boards. Each complaint was meticulously documented, his military precision evident in every detail. When he finished, it was past midnight. He checked on Marcus, who had finally fallen asleep clutching his violin case, then rejoined Sophia in the kitchen. "Find anything?" he asked, as she showed him the photos from the special education office. "They knew James," Sophia said, her voice breaking with barely contained rage. "Our baby tried to tell them, and they ignored him." James studied the document, his expression hardening. "Board President Westridge's signature is on this form. He personally declined to investigate." He looked up at Sophia. "They're going to regret that decision." The next morning, Board President Westridge called Ms. Rivera into his office. The music teacher entered warily, noting the presence of the school's lawyer. "Carmela, effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave. Westridge announced without preamble. What? Ms. Rivera stared in disbelief. On what grounds? Disrupting the educational environment, Westridge replied. Several parents have complained that you've been discussing the Wilson situation in class. That's not true, Ms. Rivera protested. Students have questions. I've simply reminded them to be kind to their classmates during a difficult time. Your contract specifies that teachers will not introduce controversial topics in the classroom. The lawyer interjected. Your leave is paid, but we expect you to turn in your keys and clear out your desk by noon. Ms. Rivera stood slowly, anger radiating from her. You know what happened to that child was wrong. Everyone in this building knows it, and this is how you respond, by silencing anyone who speaks up. That will be all, Miss Rivera, Westridge said dismissively. As news of Ms. Rivera's forced leave spread through the school, James prepared for his most public move yet. Dressed in his full uniform, medals gleaming under the studio lights, he sat across from a national morning news anchor. Captain Wilson, thank you for joining us, the anchor began. Can you tell us what happened to your son? James looked directly into the camera, his voice steady. My son Marcus has a learning disability called dyslexia that makes traditional text processing difficult. He uses music as a processing tool, which is why his violin is so important. Last week, an administrator at his school deliberately cut all the strings on his violin, claiming it violated the focus policy. The school has stated this was a miscommunication, the anchor noted. There was no miscommunication, James replied firmly. There was deliberate cruelty and institutional cover-up. We had filed all the proper accommodation forms. My son had submitted a complaint about this administrator's targeting behavior 2 weeks prior. The school ignored every warning sign. What do you hope will come from sharing your story? James leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. Accountability, justice for my son, and change so no child ever experiences this kind of violation again. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I've served this country for 15 years, protecting American values like dignity and equality. If the system won't protect my son, I will dismantle it myself and rebuild it better. The interview ended, but James's words echoed across social media, igniting a firestorm that would soon engulf the entire school district. By nightfall, James's interview had been viewed over 2 million times. Clips circulated on every social media platform, his final statement becoming a rallying cry for parents across the country. If the system won't protect my son, I will dismantle it myself. The family's phone rang constantly, news outlets requesting interviews, parents sharing similar stories, disability rights organizations offering support. Sophia fielded the calls, carefully documenting each one while James focused on their legal strategy. But most importantly, they focused on Marcus. The boy remained withdrawn, speaking little and eating less. His once vibrant musical compositions had turned dark and chaotic, pages filled with harsh notes and discordant arrangements. Still, he clung to his damaged violin like a lifeline, spending hours hunched over the silent instrument in quiet concentration. By morning, a small group of protesters had gathered outside Westridge Academy, their numbers growing with each passing hour. Parents, former students, and community members held signs reading "Justice for Marcus" and "Protect Our Children." Among them was Zoe, accompanied by her mother and brother. When reporters approached asking for interviews, Zoe politely declined. "I'm just here for my friend," she told them. But her brother David was more vocal. "This isn't an isolated incident," David told a local reporter. "Principal Hargrove has been targeting students of color for years. Ask any alumni." His words sparked a flood of social media posts from former students, each sharing their own experiences with the principal. She made me wash my face in front of the class because my makeup was too ethnic. She said my natural hair was unprofessional and would limit my career options. She told me my name was too difficult and called me Mike all year instead of Mikhail. The stories mounted, creating a damning pattern that could no longer be dismissed as misunderstanding or miscommunication. Inside the school, tension filled the hallways. Students whispered about Marcus, about Principal Hargrove, about the protesters. Teachers struggled to maintain focus, aware that every word could become part of the growing controversy. Late that evening, James received an unexpected email from someone named Alex Patel, identified as the school's IT specialist. "Captain Wilson," it read, "I've been following what happened to your son. There's something you should know." The full security video from the principal's office exists, or at least it did. Board President Westridge ordered me to delete it from our servers the morning after the incident. I told him it was gone, but I might be able to recover it from our backup system. If you're interested, we can meet somewhere off school grounds. James forwarded the email to their lawyer before responding with a meeting location. This could be exactly the evidence they needed, unedited footage showing exactly what had happened to Marcus. But Alex never showed up. 2 days passed with no word. James tried calling the number he'd provided, but it went straight to voicemail. He was considering filing a missing person report when his phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Tell your hacker to stop digging or we'll bury him." A chill ran down James's spine. He immediately forwarded the message to his military contacts in cybercrime, then called Sophia. "They're threatening, Alex," he said without preamble, "whoever they are." "The school administration wouldn't go that far," Sophia replied, uncertainty in her voice. "Maybe not Westridge," James agreed, "but someone's pulling strings here. This is bigger than one principal or one board president." While James worked to uncover the truth and locate Alex, Marcus continued his silent recovery at home. He hadn't returned to school. He couldn't face those hallways, those classrooms. But he'd begun composing again. The first few pieces were dark, almost atonal, chaotic arrangements with no clear melody. But on the fourth day, something changed. He began a new composition, a slow, mournful piece that gradually transformed into something hopeful. He couldn't play Ithis violin remained stringless, but he could hear it in his mind, the notes flowing from his pencil onto the paper. When Sophia saw it, she stood in the doorway of Marcus's room, tears silently streaming down her face. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered. Marcus didn't respond verbally, but he offered his mother the first genuine eye contact since the incident. A brief, meaningful glance that said more than words could. As the Wilson family focused on healing, the media landscape erupted into predictable battle lines. Conservative outlets framed the story as overblown. Military dad uses Pentagon connections to target educators. Westridge Academy controversy. Captain overreaches. Should military officers influence private education? In response, James called a press conference on the front lawn of their home. Dressed in civilian clothes, a deliberate choice, he stood before a bank of microphones, his posture military straight, despite his casual attire. "I've heard the accusations that I'm using my military position to intimidate the school," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Let me be clear. I am not here as Captain Wilson. I am here as Marcus's father." He methodically listed the evidence they'd gathered, the accommodation forms, Marcus's ignored complaint, witness statements, the school's contradictory public statements. These are not military tactics, he continued. This is what any parent would do to protect their child. The difference is my training has taught me to be thorough and strategic. If that makes certain people uncomfortable, perhaps they should examine why. He ended by addressing the families watching. If your child has experienced similar treatment, don't stay silent. Contact us. There is power in our collective voice. The press conference was a masterclass in controlled messaging. No outbursts, no accusations without evidence. Just a father fighting for his son with every tool at his disposal. The following day, the state's education commissioner called his own press conference at the department headquarters, flanked by the deputy commissioner and two stern-looking attorneys. He announced the formation of a special reform task force to review accommodation policies and disciplinary procedures in private schools receiving state funding. We take these allegations seriously, Commissioner Palmer stated, not once mentioning Marcus by name. While we conduct a thorough investigation, Principal Hargrove will remain on paid administrative leave. He then introduced a series of immediate reforms, including mandatory training for all administrators and a review of all disciplinary actions from the past 3 years. When reporters asked about the specific allegations of physical destruction and the violin incident, Palmer deflected. We cannot comment on ongoing investigations or individual student matters due to privacy laws. Watching from home, James scoffed. Optics, not justice, he muttered to Sophia. They're hoping this task force buys them enough time for public interest to die down. Maybe it's time to consider other options, Sophia suggested hesitantly. Another school? Maybe somewhere Marcus can get a fresh start. James turned to her, genuine surprise on his face. You want to run? I want our son back, Sophia replied, her voice cracking. The boy who used to laugh, who used to talk, who didn't flinch every time someone walked past his room. And what about the next child? James challenged. The next student who crosses Hargrove or Westridge. If we run now, how many more will suffer? That's not fair, Sophia said, anger rising in her voice. Our first responsibility is to Marcus, not to some hypothetical future victim. They're not hypothetical, James insisted. They're real, and they're waiting to see if someone will finally stand up and say, enough. Their argument was interrupted by a notification on James's phone. Zoe had sent a message, found something, coming over. 20 minutes later, Zoe sat at the Wilson kitchen table, her phone connected to their laptop. On the screen was a screenshot of a group text message between Principal Hargrove and another administrator, dated the morning of the incident. I don't know if it helps, Zoe said nervously, but my friend's older sister works at Westridge. She was in this group chat with Principal Hargrove and some others. She got kicked out after Principal Hargrove found out we're friends, but she saved some of the messages. James and Sophia leaned closer to read the exchange. Principal Hargrove, that Wilson boy is testing my patience again, playing his violin instead of taking notes. Unknown administrator. The quiet one with dyslexia. He's one of our top students. Principal Hargrove. Don't be fooled. He's been giving me attitude for weeks. Unknown administrator. Maybe just let it go. His dad's deployed. Mom's raising him alone. Principal Hargrove. No, I'm about to teach this brat a lesson he'll never forget. The timestamp showed the message had been sent just 30 minutes before Principal Hargrove had confronted Marcus about his violin. This is premeditation, James whispered, his legal training kicking in. She planned this. Can we use it? Sophia asked. In court? Absolutely, James confirmed. Zoe, Your friend's sister may need to testify. Is she willing? Zoe nodded. She feels really bad about what happened. She said she should have reported Principal Hargrove a long time ago. Later that night, after Zoe had gone home and Sophia had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from weeks of stress, James checked on Marcus one last time. To his surprise, the boy was still awake, sitting up in bed with his composition notebook. "Can't sleep?" James asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Marcus shook his head, still not speaking, but he turned his notebook toward his father. On the page was a drawing of two figures standing together, one tall in a uniform, one smaller holding what looked like a repaired violin. Both were smiling. James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That's beautiful, son," he managed to say. "Is that us?" Marcus nodded, then did something that broke James's heart wide open. He spoke just 5 words, barely above a whisper, but they changed everything. "Don't let them win, Dad." James gathered his son in his arms, holding him close as tears streamed down both their faces. "I won't, buddy," he promised fiercely. "I won't." The law office of Grace Yamada occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise, its reception area a study in understated elegance. Potted bamboo plants stood in the corners, and the walls featured black and white photographs of historic civil rights moments. James sat beside Sophia on a sleek leather sofa, his posture military straight despite his civilian clothes. Across from them, Grace reviewed the documents spread across her glass-top coffee table: medical records, school policies, witness statements, and screenshots of Principal Hargrove's damning text messages. At 42, Grace was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. The daughter of Japanese-American internment camp survivors, she had dedicated her career to fighting institutional injustice. Her record of wins against school districts, police departments, and government agencies was legendary. "You've done impressive work gathering evidence," Grace said, looking up from the papers. "Most clients come to me with anger and little else. You've brought me a case." "Military training," James replied simply. "Document everything." Grace nodded, then leaned forward. "I want to be clear about what we're facing. Private schools have deep pockets and deeper connections. They'll try to bury this under procedural delays and technical objections. Are you prepared for a long fight?" "We're prepared for whatever it takes," Sophia answered firmly. "Good." Grace gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Because I'm not just filing a complaint. I'm filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit naming Westridge Academy, Board President Westridge, and Principal Hargrove personally as defendants. Claims will include assault, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations." She paused. "This will get ugly. They'll attack your character, your parenting, even your military service." James's expression didn't change. "They can try." The following morning, as Grace's legal team prepared the paperwork, Principal Hargrove received an unexpected visitor at her small suburban home. The man who stood on her porch wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile practiced and reassuring. "Principal Hargrove, I'm Lawrence Whitfield," he introduced himself. "I'd like to discuss your legal options." Eleanor Hargrove eyed him suspiciously through the crack in her door. "I can't afford a private attorney." "You won't need to," Whitfield replied smoothly. "My services have already been arranged. May I come in?" Inside, Whitfield explained that he represented one of the city's most prestigious law firms. "A concerned party has retained us to ensure you receive the best possible defense," he said, placing his business card on her coffee table. "What concerned party?" Principal Hargrove asked, confused. Whitfield smiled. Let's just say there are people who recognize that this situation has broader implications than one administrator and one student. People who understand that traditional values and educational authority are at stake. Principal Hargrove's shoulders relaxed slightly. So they believe me that I was just doing my job? Of course, Whitfield assured her. And we're going to make sure everyone else sees it that way too. What Principal Hargrove didn't know, couldn't know, was that Lawrence Whitfield's firm had received a substantial retainer from a foundation with direct ties to 3 members of the Westridge Academy Board. The same board members who had established the Staff Protection Fund that had quietly buried other incidents over the years. By the end of the week, Grace Yamada had filed the lawsuit, and the court had granted an emergency hearing due to the nature of the claims involving a minor. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and protesters, their signs declaring support for Marcus or, in smaller numbers, defending educators' rights. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. James arrived in his dress uniform, his medals catching the fluorescent light. Principal Hargrove sat beside Lawrence Whitfield, dressed in a modest navy dress that seemed calculated to project humility. Board President Westridge and the school's legal team occupied the table furthest from the Wilson family, a physical distance that matched their strategy, separation from Hargrove's actions. Judge Eliana Barnes, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings, called the court to order. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to remind everyone that while the public interest in this case is significant, this courtroom is not a media circus. We will proceed with dignity and respect." She turned to Grace. "You may make your opening statement, counselor." Grace approached the bench. "Your Honor, this case is about abuse of power in its most naked form. An administrator tasked with nurturing and protecting children physically destroyed a 12-year-old boy's primary means of educational accommodation. She deliberately cut the strings of Marcus Wilson's violin, knowing full well that Marcus had a learning disability, dyslexia, that made his musical processing a matter of both educational and emotional health. She continued outlining how the school had failed at every level, ignoring accommodation, documentation, dismissing Marcus's prior complaint, actively covering up evidence, and retaliating against staff who spoke out. When it was the defense's turn, Board President Westridge's attorney immediately tried to distance his client from Principal Hargrove's actions. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge that an unfortunate incident occurred, Board President Westridge had no direct involvement. He runs a school of over 500 students and must trust his administrators to handle disciplinary matters appropriately. When he learned what had happened, he took immediate action by suspending Principal Hargrove." Whitfield followed with Principal Hargrove's defense. "My client was simply enforcing established school policy. She had no knowledge of any learning accommodation, as that information was never properly communicated to her. This case represents a fundamental misunderstanding, not malice." Grace's expression remained neutral, but her eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. She had expected these exact arguments and had prepared to demolish them. The first witness she called was school counselor Finch. "Mr. Finch," Grace began after the counselor was sworn in, "please tell the court what happened when Principal Hargrove brought Marcus Wilson to her office." The counselor twisted his hands nervously. She said Marcus was violating the focus policy with his violin. When Marcus mentioned his learning accommodation, Principal Hargrove said she had already checked the file and there was no exemption. "And did you verify this information yourself?" "No," Counselor Finch admitted, his voice small with shame. I should have, but Principal Hargrove was insistent that she had parental permission. Did Principal Hargrove show you any written permission? No. Did she call Marcus's parents to confirm? No. Yet you were present when she destroyed the strings on Marcus's violin. The counselor's eyes filled with tears. Yes, it's the biggest regret of my career. During cross-examination, Whitfield tried to shift blame to the counselor. Isn't it your responsibility, not Principal Hargrove's, to know which students have learning accommodations? Objection, Grace called. Counsel is attempting to deflect responsibility from his client. Sustained, Judge Barnes ruled. Mr. Whitfield, stay focused on your client's actions. As the day progressed, Grace methodically dismantled the defense's arguments. She produced emails showing Westridge had been notified within minutes of the incident and had advised Principal Hargrove to handle it quietly and avoid detailed documentation. Then came the moment that shifted the entire atmosphere of the courtroom. Alex, the IT specialist who had disappeared after contacting James, entered through a side door escorted by a court officer. He looked nervous but determined as he took the stand. Mr. Patel, Grace began, can you tell the court about the security footage from the day of the incident? Alex nodded. Every area of the school is under video surveillance, including the hallways and the principal's office. The system automatically saves footage for 30 days before overwriting. What happened to the footage from the day Marcus's violin was damaged? Board President Westridge asked me to delete it. Alex stated clearly. He said it was a student privacy issue, but that's never been our protocol before. We preserve footage whenever there's an incident. Did you delete the footage as instructed? I told him I did, Alex replied, but I actually created a backup first. It didn't feel right. Grace approached the bench. Your Honor, we'd like to submit this recovered footage as evidence. The video was displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. The quality was crisp, the angle capturing the entire office, and the content was unmistakable. Marcus sitting in the chair, tears streaming down his face as Principal Hargrove methodically cut each string on his violin. The boy's mouth was moving, pleading, but there was no audio. It didn't matter. The visual told the story clearly enough. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. One juror visibly wiped away tears. During the lunch recess, Lawrence Whitfield cornered Principal Hargrove in a private conference room. This is not going well, he said bluntly. The video is damaging. You said you could handle this, Principal Hargrove hissed. You promised me they couldn't touch me. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. You never mentioned there was a video or that you had a personal history with the father. He checked his watch. We need to change our strategy. When we return, I want you to appear remorseful. Suggest that you were overwhelmed by work stress, that you exercised poor judgment in a moment of frustration. I did nothing wrong, Principal Hargrove insisted. That boy was deliberately provoking me with his attitude and that ridiculous violin. Whitfield stared at her for a long moment. With all due respect, Principal Hargrove, if that's your position, you're going to lose everything. Your job, your administrator's license, possibly your freedom if this turns into a criminal matter. But Principal Hargrove's arrogance had been nurtured too long to be easily dismissed. Years of getting away with smaller cruelties had convinced her of her own rightness, her own untouchability. In the afternoon session, the most difficult moment arrived. Marcus was called to testify. Recognizing the potential trauma, Judge Barnes had made special accommodations. Marcus would not have to face Principal Hargrove directly. A screen was placed between them, and Marcus was accompanied by a support counselor. He entered wearing a new suit, his face solemn but composed as he took the oath. His voice was barely audible, but his resolve was evident in his straight spine and steady gaze. "Marcus," Grace began gently, "can you tell us what happened that day in your classroom?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I was writing music in my notebook after finishing my math work. Principal Hargrove got angry. She said my violin was against the rules." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I tried to tell her about my dyslexia. I told her my dad had filed papers with the school. She wouldn't listen." "What happened in the principal's office?" "She told the counselor she had permission to take my violin. She didn't. Then she took out the scissors." Marcus's voice wavered slightly. "I begged her to stop. I kept saying, 'Please call my mom.' But she just kept cutting. She seemed happy about it." The courtroom was utterly silent as Marcus described the aftermath. The stares, the whispers, the nightmares, the silence that had overtaken him for days. "Why didn't you speak?" Grace asked. "Because no one was listening anyway," Marcus answered simply. The raw truth of the statement seemed to hang in the air. Even the court reporter wiped away tears as Marcus stepped down. Judge Barnes called for a 15-minute recess, her own composure visibly affected. When court resumed, it was Principal Hargrove's turn to testify. Lawrence Whitfield had clearly coached her to appear contrite, but under the pressure of cross-examination, her facade cracked. "Principal Hargrove," Grace pressed, "did you have any personal history with Captain Wilson before this incident?" "Objection," Whitfield called. "Irrelevant." "Your Honor," Grace countered, "we have evidence that Principal Hargrove's actions were motivated by a personal vendetta against Marcus's father. It goes directly to intent." "I'll allow it," Judge Barnes ruled. "The witness will answer." Principal Hargrove's face flushed. "We may have crossed paths. Isn't it true that Captain Wilson was your superior officer during your brief military service, and that you were discharged after failing to meet basic requirements?" "He had it in for me," Principal Hargrove snapped, her composure evaporating. "Just like all of them do, these entitled parents and students who think they can weaponize disability to get special treatment. Rules apply to everyone." The courtroom fell silent at her outburst. Whitfield closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the damage done. Grace let the moment linger before asking her final question. "Principal Hargrove, did you target Marcus Wilson because of who his father is?" Principal Hargrove's silence was answer enough. The day's final surprise came when Grace called an unexpected witness, Colonel Michael Stratton, James's former commanding officer. The silver-haired veteran took the stand with military precision. After establishing his credentials, 30 years of service, multiple commendations, current position as a military ethics instructor, Grace got to the point. "Colonel Stratton, did you have occasion to observe Principal Hargrove during her military training?" "I did," he confirmed. "She was in Captain Wilson's training unit 10 years ago." "And what was your assessment of her performance?" "Below standard in every category," Colonel Stratton stated flatly. "But more concerning was her attitude toward colleagues, particularly those of color. She filed multiple complaints alleging discriminatory treatment, all of which were investigated and found to be without merit." "Did she ever make comments about Captain Wilson specifically?" "Yes. After her discharge, she told several unit members that people like Wilson would get what's coming to them eventually. We flagged it in her exit report but had no grounds for further action." The impact of this testimony was immediate. It transformed the narrative from an isolated incident into a calculated act of revenge, an administrator abusing her power over a child to settle a personal score with the child's father. As the day's proceedings concluded, The jury members' expressions told the story. Several couldn't look at Principal Hargrove. Others kept glancing sympathetically toward Marcus and his parents. That evening, while the jury deliberated, someone leaked part of Principal Hargrove's deposition to the media, specifically her comment, "They should be grateful I didn't destroy the whole violin." The public backlash was swift and fierce. Social media exploded with outrage. Calls for Principal Hargrove's permanent banning from education flooded the state board's phones and email. Board President Westridge, seeing the writing on the wall, contacted the school's lawyers, privately exploring the possibility of a separate settlement. His priority had shifted from defending the school to saving his own career. Malik Dree had been a journalist for 20 years, the last 7 specializing in education and local government. He'd covered school board meetings, budget crises, and teacher strikes, but nothing had captured his attention like the Wilson case. Something about it didn't add up. Why would a prestigious law firm like Whitfield's take on a school administrator's defense pro bono, and why was the board so determined to protect her? Malik began digging, requesting public records, talking to sources, and following financial trails. 3 weeks into his investigation, he received an anonymous email containing encrypted files. The sender identified themselves only as a concerned citizen. Inside was a gold mine, financial records showing the creation of a special fund by 3 Westridge Academy board members, James Patterson, Valerie Simmons, and Robert Walsh. The fund, officially labeled Professional Legal Support, had paid for the defense of 8 different staff members over the past decade. All cases involved allegations of misconduct against minority students. All had been quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. Principal Hargrove's legal fees were the latest expenditure from this fund. Malik's exposé hit the front page on a Sunday morning. Academy Secrets. The Hidden Fund Protecting Problem Educators. The article detailed how the board members had created a system to shield employees from consequences, using tuition money to silence victims and bury evidence. By Monday, the story had gone national. Other journalists began investigating similar arrangements in private schools across the country. What had started as one boy's trauma was revealing a pattern of institutional protection for those who abused their power. As public pressure mounted, other victims began to come forward. Jackson Reynolds, a black 9th grader who had been expelled the previous year for his distracting hairstyle. Emma Sanchez, a disabled student who had been denied accommodations and publicly humiliated by a teacher who was later defended by the same Staff Protection Fund. James, recognizing the power of these collective stories, began organizing the families. Together, they created a support network, sharing resources, legal advice, and emotional support. What had begun as one lawsuit was evolving into a movement. Ms. Rivera, reinstated after public outcry over her unpaid leave, returned to Westridge Academy to find her classroom had been reassigned, relegated to a small office in the administration wing. She was instructed to focus on curriculum development rather than teaching. Instead, she chose a different path. During her lunch break, she invited local reporters to join her outside the school. Standing on the sidewalk, public property where the administration couldn't stop her, she spoke her truth. "I failed Marcus Wilson," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew something was wrong. I saw the signs, but I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of making waves. I will carry that regret forever." She paused, gathering herself. "But I will not fail him or any student again, not ever." By her side stood James and Sophia, with Marcus between them. The image of the 4 of them, unified in purpose, despite their different races and backgrounds, became a powerful symbol of solidarity that circulated widely online. That afternoon, the school made its move. Board President Westridge called James directly, bypassing their attorneys. "Captain Wilson," he began, his tone conciliatory. "The school would like to offer a settlement of $5 million with a full admission of wrongdoing by Principal Hargrove personally." "And?" James prompted, knowing there was more. "And a non-disclosure agreement, of course. Standard procedure in cases like this." James's laugh was cold. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never about money." $7 million then," Westridge countered, "plus a college fund for Marcus. But we need this resolved quickly and quietly." "You're not buying my silence," James told him, his voice steady. "You're buying my rage, and trust me, you can't afford it." He hung up without waiting for his response. While the legal battle continued, Marcus was finding his own path to healing. His compositions had evolved, moving from dark, chaotic expressions of pain to more structured pieces that told stories of resilience and transformation. A local music shop owner, Daniel Foster, had seen Ms. Rivera's press conference and reached out to the family. Would Marcus consider performing some of his work? The recital would be private if he preferred, protecting his privacy while sharing his voice. Marcus agreed. The performance, simply titled "Silenced," featured 5 of his compositions arranged chronologically, telling the story of his trauma and gradual reclamation of self. The centerpiece was a striking piece called "Broken Strings," performed on a newly donated violin. The recital opened on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, videos of Marcus's performance had gone viral. By Sunday, recordings of his compositions had been shared thousands of times, resonating with people far beyond their city. Orders for sheet music flooded in, along with messages of support from around the world. For the first time since the incident, Marcus felt something close to pride. His pain, transformed through music, was touching others, helping them find expression for their own experiences. As public support for the Wilson family grew, so did the opposition's desperation. One morning, James found an envelope in their mailbox containing a single sheet of paper. The typed message read, "Back off, or you'll regret the bench." Sophia wanted to take it to the police immediately. "This is a clear threat," she insisted. But James studied the wording, his brow furrowed. "Regret the bench? That's specific. Too specific to be random." He set the letter aside. "No police yet. This is a clue, not just a threat. Someone's telling us to look at the bench, the judicial bench, maybe the judges. There's something there we're missing." His intuition proved correct when days later, Alex contacted them again. The IT specialist had been monitoring the school's security system remotely and had made a startling discovery. "I hacked the boardroom feed," he admitted when they met at a coffee shop miles from the school. "I know it's not strictly legal, but after they threatened me, I figured turnabout was fair play." He showed them footage from a recent emergency board meeting. The 3 board members named in Malik's article, Patterson, Simmons, and Walsh, remained in the room after others had left, apparently unaware that the recording system was still active. "They're laughing about you," Alex said, turning up the volume. "Listen." Patterson's voice came through clearly. "How long do you think the Wilson man will last? Another week? 2? My money's on him backing down after the settlement offer." Simmons replied, "Military types understand the chain of command. Once the board president steps in, he'll fall in line." Walsh chuckled. "And if not, there's always the bench option. Judge Harris owes me after that zoning exception for his lake house." The implications were clear. The board members were planning to use their influence with the judge if the case proceeded. James immediately forwarded the footage to Grace and Malik, along with a threatening note. The following day, Malik published a follow-up piece with the headline, "Board Corruption Exposed." Secret recording reveals plan to influence judge. He carefully avoided mentioning Alex as the source, protecting the whistleblower while exposing the conspiracy. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters gathered outside the academy, demanding the board members' resignations. The State Education Board announced an emergency investigation into corruption allegations. Within 48 hours, Patterson, Simmons, and Walsh had resigned, citing personal reasons and health concerns. Their departures created vacancies that would require special election selections that several parents from the newly formed advocacy group were already planning to contest. As the institutional framework supporting Principal Hargrove crumbled, her past began catching up with her. A live stream featuring a young man named Terrell Williams went viral overnight. In it, Terrell described an incident from 5 years earlier at a different school. "I was 14, he recounted, his voice steady despite the painful memory. "Principal Hargrove was my vice principal. She said my music was disruptive and would limit my academic options. When I argued, she took my saxophone and locked it away for a month. When I got it back, the keys had been damaged." Terrell had reported the incident, but his complaints had been dismissed as exaggerated. Now, with Marcus's case making headlines, he felt empowered to speak out again. "I thought I was the only one," he concluded. "I want Marcus to know he's not alone either." Other former students began sharing similar stories. Not all involved physical actions, but all revealed a pattern of targeting students of color for their appearance, speech, or cultural expressions. The mounting evidence transformed public perception. Principal Hargrove was no longer seen as a strict administrator who had made one mistake. She was exposed as a serial abuser who had finally been caught.